London does not simply meet the night, it absorbs it. By the middle of the 19th century, the city had become a vast mechanism of stone, soot, and breath, a place where darkness did not fall so much as thicken. Coal smoke from millions of hearths mixed with river damp and industrial vapor until the air itself carried weight. Fog gathered low and persistent, yellow-gray and oily, clinging to brick and iron. It did not merely hide the street, it reshaped it. Gas lamps burned through the haze with limited reach. Their light did not travel far, only far enough to reveal fragments. A doorway, a curb, the edge of a wall. Beyond that radius, the street dissolved into shadow and distance lost its meaning. 10 paces could feel like an absence. Familiar routes became uncertain. Shapes moved without detail, reduced to silhouettes that could not be read. Behind a narrow shop window, a pane of glass clouds with condensation. A fingertip clears a small circle through the moisture. Through that opening, the street resolves in pieces. A lamp flickers, struggling against the fog. Wet cobbles reflect a broken halo of light. Everything beyond remains indistinct, as if the city has been cut off mid-sentence. When vision fails, explanation rushes in to replace it. In streets like these, rumor becomes structure. A figure seen briefly is no longer a neighbor or a tradesman, but an outline onto which meaning is projected. The city has grown too large to be known whole. Gaps appear between places, between people, between what is seen and what is assumed. Those gaps fill quickly. Sound travels differently in fog. Footsteps arrive before the body that makes them. Water moves along stone with a steady hiss. A bell sounds and then stops, swallowed almost immediately. From somewhere high, an owl calls once and falls silent. The air carries sulfur, river mud, damp wool, and ink. Under a street lamp at the corner stands a makeshift stall. The vendor remains long after respectable shops have shuttered their windows. A heavy coat hangs from his shoulders, stiff with age and grease. Coins strike wood. Thin paper rustles. A single sheet is lifted into the light. The paper is cheap, the ink still wet. A woodcut illustration fills the page, rough and exaggerated, showing a distorted figure caught mid-motion, more symbol than anatomy. This is not sustenance for the body. It is sustenance for attention. The page is read aloud. A line stops short. An image suggests more than it shows. Listeners supply the missing pieces. The same paragraph is repeated at the next corner, then again further down the street. Repetition fixes it in memory. What began as print becomes orientation. Before the city took its modern shape, fear lived indoors. It passed quietly between generations, bounded by walls and hearths. Industrial London changed that scale. Night became public. Darkness became shared. Print gave those conditions a language. A sentence under a lamp could name a street. An image could stain a district. Reputation settled where fog lingered longest. The city learned to read itself in fragments. Ink and shadow worked together. A torn page passed hand to hand could alter how a place was remembered long after the paper was gone. One sheet, briefly held in light, could turn a stretch of road into something watched, avoided, whispered about. One torn page changed a street into a rumor. Cobble and memory lie folded one on the other across London, so that moving through streets is an act of reading layers. The city that stands in the 19th century is built on older plans whose lines remain legible in bends, blind alleys, and irregular junctions. Roman alignments persist as faint straightaways beneath later turns. Medieval lanes fold back and narrow where wheeled traffic was not intended. Churches, guild halls, market yards, and charnel grounds mark boundaries that were argued and negotiated over centuries. Ordinary building fabric is a palimpsest. Daytime seeming casualness often reveals itself at night as long habit. Night transforms architectural detail into thresholds. Doorways, cellar hatches, privies, basement stairs, narrow passages, and covered alleys collect residues of lives and deaths. Where lamplight is thin, a threshold becomes porous, a place through which rumor passes. Parish lines and parish duties once defined who cared for whom and who recorded what in ink. Parish clerks kept lists of baptisms and burials. Those lists are not only administrative records, they are distributed memory of loss. Where many names cluster in short spans, the ground carries traces of repeated misfortune, and lanes that once led to burial places acquire associations that persist long after the original events. A route used for moving the dead in one century becomes a route whose name invites low voice in the next. That texture matters at night because it translates absence into expectation. Mass interments and emergency burials from epidemics remain part of the city's geography. Ground that once contained many bodies accrues meaning. People tell of pits and hurried trenches as if the earth remembers. Those places attract stories because they are already locations of important happenings. A memory of a pit or an emergency burial is not erased by new paving. It sits beneath cobbles like an unfinished sentence. Certain lanes become the object of quiet speech because they retain histories that the living feel but will not name. The presence of the dead in such spots makes rumor feed more readily. An unmarked mound, an old ditch, a mossed patch of soil operate as invitations for the imagination to do work that daylight forbids. Rituals of local order shaped the experience of night. Before metropolitan centralization, there existed a variety of local solutions for keeping the night. Watchmen, parish constables, wardens, paid watch forces, and other local officials all performed overlapping duties. They patrolled, called the hour, checked doors, watched for fire, and in some places kept written notes of breaches. Those practices were uneven in quality and visibility. When a watchman walked a beat, the night presented an organized texture. When watch duty lapsed, the city felt porous. A missing lantern, a gate left ajar, a shutter that would not close these small failures, announced themselves and invited local conjecture. Minor lapses multiplied into narratives. An untended step, a scuff on a threshold, a lamp that sputtered where it should burn steady, these are readable traces. They are the materials from which rumor is fashioned. The institutional patchwork meant that the experience of night differed from parish to parish and town to town, sometimes within short distances of one another. Parliament UK news centralisation began to change that patchwork in London with the creation of the Metropolitan Police in 1829. The new force supplied a uniform model of patrol and accountability in the Metropolitan District and started to replace many traditional watch functions in central parts of the city. That legal and organizational reform altered rhythm and authority after dark in places under the new jurisdiction. Yet, the change was not instantaneous beyond the Metropolitan's remit. Many towns and parishes retained local arrangements for years. And watchmen continued in varied roles in provincial places and in administrative records well into the 1830s and beyond. Surviving watch reports and vestry materials from the 1830s show that older practices persisted even as centralization advanced. The result was a transitional landscape in which lamplighters, parish constables, paid watchmen, and early police officers coexisted in a shifting ecology of nighttime governance. Wikipedia, Poisson domestic thresholds function as social grammar. A back door is not merely a back door. It is where refuse gathers, where damp collects, and where footsteps leave prints difficult to erase. Cellar doors lead to storage and to smells and mold. Alleyways accumulate dropped goods, lost buttons, scuffed shoe prints, and the flaking of small secrets. A boarded-up doorway signals abandonment. A well-kept stoop signals occupancy. At night, such differences become claims on safety. A single scuff in a doorway can become the seed of a rumor because it is a legible trace in a place where meaning is scarce. Parish rituals for announcing death and containing illness created public practices that regulated gossip as much as they recorded fact. A bell tolling, the reading of a register, a public inquest, these acts both disclose and frame events. A name entered in a burial book is not only fact, it is an act of recognition that places loss in an official ledger. The absence of a name or a delayed entry functions as provocation. A missing record becomes a blank people prefer to fill. Vestry minutes in parish books often contain scrappy notations about lamp duties and nuisance removal. Those small administrative texts reveal what local communities thought worth managing, and they supply anchors that rumor later seizes upon. Daily movements make social texture tangible. In a narrow lane where moonlight rarely reaches the cobbles, a lamplighter moves with measured rhythm, and a ward or a watchman keeps a slow patrol. A woman leans from an upper window to call a child. A cellar trader shutters a stall and balances, a crate on a shoulder. These motions are learned and repeated. When one rhythm breaks, it registers with force. A lamplighter late by a single block creates a physical gap in which people notice things they would otherwise ignore. A missing routine in watch rounds opens space for speculation. Townspeople register such breaches and retell them until the mention becomes part of local ledger. Rumor travels on the same lines that legitimate information once traveled. Family ties, employment relations, parish links, and shop networks. These are the threads that carry news. A remark overheard in a kitchen becomes a named story by morning. The mechanics are simple. A detail is observed. The detail is told and retold. Each retelling tends to add certainty where none existed and to convert ambiguity into statement. Listeners supply motives, names, and causes. A neighbor hears an alleged event and supplies a likely villain. The next teller inserts an unattributed detail and passes the whole forward. Repetition thickens the claim until people begin to act as if the event were recorded fact. Material objects anchor rumor in tactile reality. A glove found at high tide, a button snagged on a hedge, a scrap of cloth washed up on a riverbank. Any such object allows the community to craft a narrative around a person or a transgression. Objects operate as indices. They do not speak, but people read them as if they did. A shoe at low tide becomes evidence. A torn coat becomes testimony. Objects may later enter ledgers in courts or inventories, thereby gaining a second life as documentary traces. Random flotsam thus converts into bones of a public tale. Institutions at the margins feed rumor while keeping certain practices obscure. Workhouses, infirmaries, and asylums often stood at the edge of residential streets. Walls and gates separated interior life from street life. Outsider knowledge of these spaces remained partial and frequently sensationalized. The institutional night had a distinct soundscape: the clack of wooden shoes, a gate scraping, the low murmur within wards. Those sounds provided texture, but not full understanding. Unmarked burials, hurried transfers, and improvised removals produced lacunae. Cheap prints and penny songs found material in those gaps. Partial visibility combined with public appetite to produce stories that cast institutions as sites of danger or scandal. Memory of older disasters supplies a cultural stock of images that makes new events seem to fit familiar patterns. Plague pits, long ago closed, remain present on maps and in rumor. People tell of houses that never prospered after a death, and of fields that refused to bear. Old surveys show vanished churches and streets erased in later records. Such traces become available to tellers as corroborative detail. The more a city accumulates stories about its own past, the more ready it is to fit new events into existing molds. In that way, the past functions as a resource rumor, mines for confirmation. Legal texts and ordinances translate custom into written authority and thereby supply material that rumor later reuses. A note in a vestry minute about lamp duties or refuse removal may appear bureaucratic. Read differently, that same note reveals how public authority attempted to shape nighttime behavior. An ordinance requiring a household to keep a lamp at a corner on certain nights answers a pragmatic problem for late travelers. Over time, the lamp acquires social meaning. The lamp signals care. The absence of a lit lamp signals neglect. A neighbor mentions an unlit lamp at market. A vendor passes the observation under lamplight. The administrative note and the whispered remark together create a textile of evidence and gossip. Practice reshapes place. Repeated avoidance of a lane changes it. People who walk around a place instead of across it produce a behavioral difference that then justifies the original decision. Habits create geography. Candlelight in doorways, performed on particular nights, signals protection and produces a local regime of safety. Where such rituals arise, they reinforce one another and harden into custom. Visible acts of care become reasons to trust a place, and absence of such acts becomes reason for suspicion. Everyday instruments of control and neglect leave marginal notes that accumulate meaning. Parish constables who annotated lists might record a door left unlocked 2 nights running, and then note a suspicious visitor near that same door. Such marginal scraps are small dossiers of local concern. Vestry minutes ordering removal of offensive accumulations simultaneously record anxieties about hygiene and moral order. Cheap print and the penny press scavenged such archival scraps, turning administrative irritation into motive and giving the public figures and villains to fear. Children taught to travel in pairs after dusk, neighbors who leave chairs by windows as signs someone is at home, laundresses who count lanterns on a route. These low-cost rituals function as informal technologies of security. Where such practices erode fear can reassert quickly. When such practices strengthen, they render vulnerability invisible by producing a communal fabric legible only to insiders. An ordinary administrative minute can act as hinge for social memory. A vestry orders a lamp to be kept at a named corner on certain nights. The text reads plain and dry. Over years, the lamp gains meaning. A burning lamp signals that a household keeps time and duty. When the lamp fails, neighbors notice. The unlit lamp moves from household complaint to vendor copy. An observation at a kitchen table becomes text in a magistrate's note, and then copy in a cheap sheet. The administrative minute and the whispered remark combine to produce a chain of attention. Stone, paper, and human watching maintain parallel ledgers that overlap and inform one another. Thresholds and parish books, watchman ledgers, and household. Rituals form substrata on which later transformations act. The practices that ordered night before the spread of gaslight were not mere habits of darkness. They were systems of local competence and readable signs. Those techniques did not vanish when industry intensified and when centralized policing reached parts of the city. They bent and combined with the new persisting as readable detail for an urban population that would soon learn to turn fragments of evidence into full narratives. The specific dates of institutional change matter. The Metropolitan Police Act of 1829 established a new uniform force in the Metropolitan District and began to replace many traditional watch functions in central London. The accession of Queen Victoria in 1837 marks the beginning of the Victorian era proper. Between those moments, the city experienced a transition in which older local practices continued to coexist with new forms of public order. That transitional quality helps explain why rumor and reputation remain such potent forces, even as the mechanics of night changed in name and organization. Gaslight arrived not as a single triumph, but as a slow and noisy reconfiguration of the night. The light itself was a technical fact and a social instrument. Where oil or candle gave small pockets of yellow, gas threw a steadier column of light and then a larger pool. Streets that had once been islands of shadow became linked by a measurable radius of clarity. The effect was not simply brightness. It was a change in scale and in tempo. Distance felt altered. The eye moved differently. A face that had been an anonymous silhouette at a dozen paces now resolved into features a few feet further out. Perception stretched and contracted with each new lamp. The first gasworks and their mains arrived with industrial noise. Valves hissed. Pipes ran under pavements and vibrated faintly when the pressure changed. Each new lamp required a small ecology of human labor. Gas fitters learned routes. Lamp mantles needed replacing. Streets gained a maintenance rhythm. Lamplighters kept schedules of burning and extinguishing. The light installed a new expectation of continuity. Where a household had once relied on an interior fire for necessary tasks, the street itself now offered a public service of visibility. That publicness mattered. Light turned private routes into shared pathways, and shared pathways needed stories. Railways and factories remade the soundscape as effectively as gas remade the sightline. Iron rails sang under weight. Station roofs flashed with steam and sparks. A train cut the night into timed segments, a moving annunciation that put anonymous distance and urgency into the same gesture. Factories kept their own lamps, arrays of glazing and chimneys that glowed at dusk and through complex shadows across worker housing. The industrial pulse created new flows of bodies and new concentrations of hours. Workers arrived at irregular times. Markets extended into late hours. Temporary economies formed around shift changes and late departures. Migration intensified the effect. Rural arrivals came with different habits and different thresholds for what counted as known. New workers lodged in dense tenements and turned shared rooms into communal economies of sleep and work. Language and custom shifted. Where strangers clustered, the city found fresh appetite for narratives that explained who belonged and who did not. A newly arrived man at a stall by a lamp might sell a rumor to a neighbor who then turned that rumor back into a guarded instruction. The crowd became both audience and participant in the making of stories. That new night produced night economies. Markets that once closed at dusk began to reappear in altered forms. Night bakers, night sellers, and night carriers filled tasks that could not be done by daylight alone. Theaters extended their hours. Taverns and lodging houses curated late trade. In these places, the social cost of attention fell and the price of spectacle rose. Public life concentrated in nodes where light, glass, and heat met. Those nodes required narrative forms that could travel by voice and by cheap print. Cheap theater learned to time a blackout, a trapdoor, a scream. Penny serials learned to time a sentence, a pause, a cliffhanger. The technical failures of the new infrastructure produced fertile ground for rumor. A broken lamp on a corner did not simply darken a patch of pavement. It created an aperture in the social map. Where light failed, the mind filled the gap. A late train that rattled in but deposited its passengers in fog became the site of an after-story. Who disembarked, where they went, whose coat was missing. A factory whistle that did not blow on schedule was read as an omen. The new mechanics of industrial life meant that a small malfunction could acquire moral significance quickly. When the lamplighter came late, the vendor at the stall mentioned the delay. A customer repeated the remark to a neighbor. The same sentence passed around the block and arrived at a tavern altered into suspicion. Gaslight also altered theatrical technique and visual expectation. The steady, broader illumination allowed actors and stagehands to experiment with gradations of shadow and reflection. Stagecraft filtered into streetcraft. People became accustomed to a certain cadence of reveal and conceal. A slowly dimming street lamp performed like a staged blackout. The eye learned to anticipate a visible move and to be surprised when the move failed. Sensory habits crossed sights. The timing of a curtain fall influenced the timing of a rumor spread. Print learned that rhythm. Editors and vendors matched their page breaks to the public sense of pause and release. Human vignettes make the change legible. A newly arrived worker stands on a quay at dusk and watches the first working gas lamp hiss to life. The light seems to test the air and then decide a small radius around itself that will be safe for a step. The worker notes the new reach of visibility, and then notices the shape of a distant man who walks too quickly and keeps his head down. A few days later, the worker hears that the man boarded a late train and left without paying a lodging debt. The anecdote moves from mouth to mouth until it appears as a paragraph in a cheap sheet with an engraving that exaggerates the silhouette into a crouched threat. At another corner, a lamplighter who has worked a route for years misses a single lamp. The cause is trivial, a gutter blocked by a stray crate or a broken valve in the gas main. The hole in the light opens a blank. A child spots the gap first and runs home to tell a mother. Mothers lean from windows, and watchmen note the absence in their rounds. An old woman at a door says, quietly, that the unlit lamp is the same corner that used to be troublesome. That small connection is enough. Vendors on subsequent nights sell paragraphs that name the corner and hint at its history. And the printed line arrives shaped by the slow, private observations of the few. Infrastructure also remade habit and memory by altering movement. Where the night once hid routes, the lamp made them visible and therefore survivable. Patterns of walking changed, and so did patterns of attention. Night lanes that acquired light became preferred routes, and new reputations formed quickly. A lane that moved from unlit to lit could gain a reputation for safety and see new commerce. Conversely, a lane that lost lamps could be dropped not only from habitual routes, but from maps of trust. The city rewired itself in small decisions that publicly signaled risk or care. Markets of spectatorship emerged. Some nights a crowd gathered around a lamp to hear news read. The lamplight made an audience, and the vendor made a moment. The cheap page required a setting, and Gaslight supplied it. The same lamp that revealed a torn edge of an engraving gave a paragraph the spatial center to be heard and repeated. Lamplight turned random observers into witnesses, and those witnesses into narrators. The architectural and mechanical systems thus created not only conditions for sight, but social roles for narration. The industrial night also encouraged ephemeral economies of image. Engravers and illustrators supplied crude plates that could be printed cheaply and attached to penny sheets. A scratched plate that exaggerated a villainous hand or a shadowed face made a paragraph more portable. Visual shorthand replaced slow description. The same plate could be reused across issues with slight changes. Repetition of image and sentence bound the rumor to a visual economy. A remembered engraving, worn at the edges, acted like mnemonic glue. Where a lamp highlighted a printed plate, the audience attached more credence to the report. Material repetition hardened rumor into reputation. Failure and repair hence functioned as narrative devices. An untended valve, a broken mantle, a late train, or a damped curtain all produced a sequence of human attention and human interpretation. The city learned to read malfunctions as signs. Those signs could be taken as evidence of neglect or of threat. The new systems of light and motion therefore required new stories to explain them. The crowd provided those stories with speed. Echoes moved through tenements, across workhouses, and into the press. When a single lamp failed on a specific night, and a vendor printed a paragraph about a suspicious figure seen near that dark patch, the result was often a rumor with measurable velocity. Within hours, the line could exist in spoken form in a dozen taverns and appear on paper sold under Gaslight. The transformation of the night thus involved geometry and rhythm, technology and gossip. Gaslight established new centers of clarity. Rail and factory introduced tempo and displacement. Migration multiplied the pools of witnesses and the ranges of suspicion. Theater and print borrowed and refined timing and shock. The sum of these changes was not merely a brighter night, but a night with new vectors of meaning, new nodes for public attention, and a greater hunger for images that fit quick consumption. The city learned to make and to sell its own fright. A single stalled lamp or a single delayed train could start a rumor that then acquired its own infrastructure of belief. The vendor at a stall under a lamp was ready for the moment. A paragraph printed in haste could name a corner and fix its reputation. The lamp that failed on one night therefore mattered less as an engineering fault than as a pivot point for narrative. The technical and the theatrical converged so that a broken mantle was as much a storytelling device as a lamp that needed repair, and the cheap page that carried its echo served as the mechanism that translated mechanical failure into shared fear. That translation provided the path back to the vendor stall. Where the lamp failed, the vendor sold a paragraph. Where the paragraph landed, the crowd supplied motive. Where the crowd supplied motive, the street acquired a new map. The new night had its technicians and its storytellers, its valves and its vendors. Together, they remade how the city moved, how the city listened, and how the city learned to be afraid. A sheet of cheap paper under a lamp functions as both object and occasion. The paper is light, fibrous, stained by press oil. Cheap pulp pressed and folded into an instrument for rapid transmission. A woodcut image glues an impression to the eye. A headline line is set to hook the ear. A vendor lifts a stack, thumbs the top sheet, and the sheet becomes the node that links private impression to public circulation. The economics are plain. Low cost lowers the barrier to acquisition. Low price transforms a single paragraph into a thing that can be bought and possessed briefly, then passed, quoted, and repeated. The penny press made rumor affordable. The press operates as system. Printers, paper suppliers, engravers, compositors, pressmen, and hawkers form an industrial chain that converts typesetting into a portable rumor. Each role adds its own tendencies. Engravers simplify, exaggerate, and create visual shorthand. Compositors arrange type to permit energetic headlines and cliffhanger endings. Pressmen churn out sheets and runs that make repetition inevitable. Distribution is decentralized. Vendors gather at lamplit corners, at market gates, near river stairs, and at theater exits. The vendor is not merely a retailer of information. The vendor manages attention. A reading aloud by a vendor is an act of publicization. A vendor who knows the rhythm of local corners will choose which paragraphs to deliver with a louder voice, and which to tuck away for a later, more profitable hour. Readers of penny papers are composite publics. Some buy for novelty, some for instruction, others for confirmation of existing fear. A child may ask for a sensational paragraph to bring home and repeat before supper. A laborer may buy a sheet as a way to start a conversation at the tavern. A servant may slip a paragraph into a pocket and later repeat it for a neighbor. The act of reading aloud binds the paper to social performance. The printed line acquires weight when repeated in a semicircle under lamplight. The rhythm of a cellar reading, of pauses inserted to draw a breath, of a crowd leaning in. These practices determine which clauses will be remembered and which will fade. Oral repetition fixes a printed sentence in ways the original compositor did not anticipate. Serialization is a technique tuned for repetition. Stories sold in parts create habits of return and a cultural appetite for continuation. Editors learned that leaving a sentence unresolved produced demand. Cliffhanger endings function as a manufacturing of suspense. Readers invested in a serial supply, the interim narratives that connect parts. When editors split a revelation across issues, they depend on the reader's willingness to complete missing detail in conversation. The result is collective authorship. A serialized thief, a recurring suspicious figure, or a repeated image of a shadowed hand is not only an editorial artifact, it becomes a shared property of the neighborhood that reads it aloud. Illustration matters because many readers are visual. Woodcut plates reproduce crudely but memorably. A shadow with exaggerated clawed fingers, a face rendered as a dark oval with eyes like pinpricks, a handkerchief with an embroidered initial. These visual cues attach to text and persist across retellings. An image can be reused across issues. A stock plate can appear in multiple narratives until the image becomes a visual cipher that the crowd interprets independently of the original copy. Reuse of image and reuse of line create a cultural economy where a single scratch of the burin accumulates meaning across stories and years. Vendors act as filters. A paragraph sold in one parish may be unsaleable in a neighboring parish. Vendors choose copy with attention to local reputations and local appetites. Where a lane carries a recent recovery from the river, a vendor might set a paragraph that suggests danger near dockside. Where a theater scandal is keenly felt, a vendor might emphasize stage names and suggestive detail. The vendor calibrates circulation to location, and in doing so both reflects and shapes the rumor ecology. The same printed paragraph read at the river stairs and read at a theater exit will produce different afterlives. Mechanics of amplification are simple yet powerful. An initial report, often a short paragraph containing a fact fragment and a suggestive image, is read aloud. A neighbor supplies a likely motive. A friend supplies a missing fact. The account returns to the vendor as elaborated copy. An editor sees that copy and converts it into a longer paragraph for the next issue. The next morning, that paragraph appears under lamplight with a woodcut that heightens its menace. In this way, the sequence of oral elaboration and printed reissue creates accelerating loops of detail. Each loop of repetition reduces uncertainty and increases certainty. A rumor is no longer tentative. Printed repetition lends it an air of documentation. Human vignettes reveal the social mechanics. A woman at a washtub hears a vendor reading of a body found at low tide. She repeats the paragraph to her neighbor with a speculation about a lodger who had been late paying rent. The neighbor adds a detail about a coat seen on the quay. A child introduces an overheard name. By the next day, a compositor's apprentice composes a paragraph that strands half a motive and suggests a known trespasser. The paragraph sells. A woodcut plate exaggerates the silhouette. The lane receives a new reputation. That sequence is not conspiratorial. It is the action of ordinary people trying to explain a partial sighting by attaching more known material to it. Penny serials and broadsides served distinct audiences but overlapped in technique. Serial fiction exploited narrative form with recurring villains, recurring tropes, and stock scenes that matched the theater. Broadsides and single sheets aimed for immediate purchase and quick circulation. Both benefited from the roof of anonymity that urban density afforded. The more anonymous a crowd, the more willing listeners were to accept a printed line as having general force. This is not to say that readers were gullible. Many readers were skeptical and used print strategically to confirm existing fears or to mark reputation. Yet, the affordance of cheap print supplied a ritual of repeatable reference that made rumor easier to anchor. The city itself supplied an infrastructure for circulation. River stairs, market gates, railway station approaches, theater exits, and tavern thresholds acted as nodes where paper and voice could meet broad audiences. The lamplight at a corner provided a natural theater, and the vendor a stage manager. A sheet sold at dusk could travel through a dozen neighborhoods before dawn. The mobility of the population, increased by industrial labor schedules and by migration, raised the probability that a printed line would land in a receptive audience. The transport networks of the city amplified content by carrying people who carried paragraphs. Regime and law also influenced circulation. Laws restricting obscene or seditious material shaped editorial choice and forced innovation in suggestion. When direct accusation carried risk, editors learned that allusion and implication provided plausible deniability while still stoking interest. Editors and vendors developed techniques to skirt formal prohibition by emphasizing the sensational aspect and framing stories as cautionary tales or moral examinations. The language of suggestion, hinting, and strategic redaction became part of the grammar that vendors learned to deploy with a practiced voice. The economics of supply and demand produced confirmation bias. Sensational paragraphs sold. Sensational paragraphs, therefore, increased in supply. As more sensational material circulated, vendors and editors raised the stakes. The result was a market hungry for images of transgression and for simple narratives that converted complex social anxieties into discrete villains. Crime, foreignness, and institutional neglect supplied repeatable elements that printed copy could recombine. When a paragraph that implicated a particular group sold well, the angle was repurposed. The market favored forms that produced rapid circulation rather than nuanced explanation. Clerks and informal recorders translated rumor into copy with a particular tempo. A clerk sitting in a press room might note the cadence of a vendor's reading and carve a headline to match. Compositors developed habits of repetition, and editors learned to exploit them. The press thus institutionalized the improvisations of the street. The cheap page converted improvisation into repeatable form. Over time, the habits of typesetting and the habits of street performance converged so that printed form anticipated oral performance, and vice versa. The penny press also participated in legal and moral economies. Inquests, coroner, reports, and magistrates' notes provided raw material and also editorial cover. A sheet might quote a magistrate's name or an inquest finding to supply official resonance to a paragraph. Conversely, printed rumor could pressure magistrates to take notice or to open inquiries. The relationship between cheap print and official record was thus dialogic. Print could both appropriate and instantiate official language, sometimes producing a feedback loop where rumor and record fed one another. Illustration detail often functions as a hinge. A particular woodcut of a handkerchief with an embroidered monogram, or a coat with a distinct button pattern, supplies the reader with an index to stitch disparate reports together. When an image repeats across issues and across vendors, it begins to act as a sign. The plate becomes shorthand that ties multiple paragraphs into an implicit series. Readers come to recognize plates and to associate them with certain moods and certain types of story. That visual repetition gives rumor a mnemonic weight and turns ephemeral copy into durable association. The culture of public reading matters because it converts private sensory experience into public narrative form. The moment of reading aloud under lamplight is where the printed line becomes social act. The vendor mediates the moment. The repeated paragraph, acquires traction when it is sounded and received. The audience acts by supplying missing detail and by choosing which lines to repeat. The print performs, the crowd completes, and the street receives a new map of meaning. Rumor cascades follow predictable structural patterns. An initial report contains a fragment. The fragment invites causation. Listeners supply motives and names. A vendor or an editor amplifies the fragment. Visual shorthand attaches. The next iteration adds alleged evidence, often a found object or an overheard remark. Repetition hardens into reputation. The process can be fast, a matter of hours, or slow, a matter of weeks, depending on mobility and on the salience of the reported subject. The crucial variable is not veracity, but circulation velocity. Fast-moving paragraphs tend to become accepted narrative anchors, irrespective of their factual density. Human consequences follow when reputations harden. A lane labeled dangerous loses commerce, residents alter movement, landlords adjust rents, and social networks reconfigure. Reputation becomes a kind of infrastructure that shapes behavior. The printed paragraph thus does more than excite curiosity. It participates in reordering space, commerce, and social relations. The economics of rumor affect the material city. At the edge of the paragraph, there often sits an engraving detail that refuses neat reading. A woodcut may show a shadow with a notch on the sleeve, an embroidered initial half visible, a boot with a torn sole. These small marks invite identification. Listeners lean into the task of matching marks to persons. That matching is rarely conclusive, but it is convincing enough. A torn cuff seen near the river, a button found by a key, a boot washed up at low tide. These objects feed the paragraph, and the paragraph feeds the gossip. The loop closes when an image and an object together create a story that seems to move from material proof to narrative conclusion. Newsvendors and the penny press taught the city how to read fear as a shared commodity. Paper, image, vendor, and crowd combined to produce a durable practice. Copy-shaped perception and perception-shaped circulation. The cheap sheet converted partial sight into public rumor and public rumor into territorial reputation. The act of buying a sheet under lamplight is thus centrally an act of participation in a practice that converts private uncertainty into collective orientation. The city's night became readable in printed lines. A torn page under a lamp names a place. A repeated image becomes a code. A paragraph sold by a vendor translates private glimpse into public map. Cheap print did more than tell stories. It created the habits by which the city learned to fear itself. A step from the fogged street into the theater lobby crosses a hard seam of sensation. Cold air gives way to a wall of heat, the warm press of bodies, and an odor that hangs like a second atmosphere. Orange peel and spilled ale, damp wool drying in the glow, the metallic hiss of gas jets, and the dry dust of sawings scatter combine into a single heavy smell. Gaslight throws a flat, upturned glare from the footlights, making faces look like masks, sending deep hollows under cheekbones, carving eyes into bright pinpricks. The gallery above reads like a luminous cavern, high and steep, the working class leaning over railings, voices ready to rise. The theater interior is designed to shape attention. Narrow rake, low proscenium, painted wings, and forced perspective all conspire to make a small stage feel vast. Backdrops are painted with exaggerated depth. A woods becomes an ocean of shadow. A graveyard stretches to a vanished horizon. Trapdoors concentrate movement into sudden vertical ruptures. A prop dropped from above can resolve a plot point without exposition. The stage machinery is as much a character as the actors. Ropes, pulleys, sandbags, and tracks sit beneath the boards like a hidden skeleton. Stagehands move in near darkness, timing a shift with a practiced breath, changing an entire scene in the space of a shouted cue. Actors work inside a high-pressure economy of gesture. Villains wear sharp silhouettes, long black coats, and angular collars that eat light. They prowl with a measured predation, a slow, deliberate gait that suggests a hunger more than a motive. Heroines are small and fragile light, hands raised in repeated poses that map distress for the furthest row. Voice carries, as instrument low for menace, high for pleading. Phrases stretched and struck with the exact rhythm that will pull the gallery in and hold them taut. Theatrical timing becomes civic training. The audience learns when to boo and when to cheer, where to shout an aside that will affect a performance, how to give the actor fuel. Technical illusions turn suggestion into visible fact. The vampire trap snaps an actor through the floor and into absence. The ghost glide lets a body cross the stage as if suspended in midair. Pepper's ghost produces a transparent double that seems to float in the middle distance, a trick of angled plate glass and careful control of gaslight intensity that makes a murder appear as a pale reflection that can be walked through. Those devices do not merely amaze, they convert the abstract idea of the supernatural into a sensory proof. In a city where fog already renders figures ambiguous, the sight of a transparent corpse on a physical stage confirms the sense that boundaries between life and death are fragile. Sound is engineered to bypass reflection and land as feeling. A small pit orchestra underpins every scene. The composer assigns leitmotifs. A tremolo string signals rising dread. A low brass phrase announces a villain. Percussive thunder runs, iron balls roll down wooden troughs, shake the rafters. Rain machines, drums filled with shot or peas, create a persistent hiss that the body reads as storm. The soundscape is not atmospheric afterthought. It commands the lungs and muscles of the crowd. The body leans, the breath catches, the gallery responds in a single effective movement. Stage danger is real and it heightens stakes. Gas jets and wooden scenery put every performance near the possibility of flame. Chandeliers swing, mantles flare, curtains catch, and the memory of theater fires circulates among patrons. That knowledge adds an edge. Fictional deaths on stage meet the risk of real conflagration. The proximity of plausible hazard makes the staged violence feel less symbolic, more immediate. The audience leaves with the sense that the night might hold a similar peril, that the same bright light that reveals could also devour. Theater life is industrial. Painters work with huge brushes on canvases that must read at distance. A single backdrop can be 20 feet wide and painted in forced perspective so that a small stage reads like a sprawling moor. Scene painters mix pigments and vats, layer shadow and highlight, then roll canvases into place while stagehands shift ropes and weights. Costumers repair hems in the dark. Actors apply grease paint in cramped cubicles. And stage crews move flats with the precision of dock workers. All this labor is invisible to the gallery, and that invisibility is required. The miracle must seem effortless. Melodrama supplies a moral architecture easy to reproduce in speech. the stage simplifies motive. Villainy is shaped by a handful of signs. A cloak, a limp, a repeated coughing fit, a particular watch or monogram, all serve as instantly legible codes. The public learns the grammar quickly. The same economy suits the penny sheet. A villain described in shorthand on a page finds a ready audience who can fill in the rest with memory of theatrical types. The theater teaches an imagistic shorthand that print then redeploys. Performance leaks into street life. An actor who plays a famous villain for a season becomes webbed with that role in public perception. Men seen in long overcoats are easy to recode as characters from the latest hit. A lead actor who leaves the stage in costume and walks into the fog may be followed home by patrons who cannot separate role and man. The boundary between acting and identity is porous. Gossip about a private life becomes immediate copy in the press. Poster and playbill amplify these slippages. A scandal that begins as a caste dispute can spread into an accusation printed in a cheap sheet and then shouted at a lamplit corner. Audience participation is part of the contract. The gallery is not passive. Shouts, whistles, boos, and applause are woven into the timing. A curtain beat depends on crowd noise. A performer waits for a hush that will let a whisper land like a blade. That interactivity makes the theatrical moment communal. It also creates a feedback loop with vendors. A passage that earned a particular howl will be echoed by a vendor who expects that response at the next performance. Page and stage trade cues. Scenes move with a rhythm adapted from stagecraft. A common melodramatic structure begins with domestic warmth, introduces transgression, stretches peril, and closes with moral reckoning. The short printed tale borrows that arc. A paragraph about a found letter functions like a condensed scene, a torn domestic object invoking the entire arc. Readers who have seen similar tableau on stage supply the connective tissue. Serial fiction extends that practice, leaving a last line unresolved so that the audience must return or leave a communal task of interpolation between issues. Visual plates make narrative portable. Woodcut illustrations reduce faces and gestures to a graphic shorthand. A stock plate of a clawed shadow or a woman with hands raised becomes a cipher that transfers between sheets and between years. The same plate can be printed and reprinted, worn at the edges until it becomes a cultural sign. The image attaches to different paragraphs, like a traveling motif, providing a visual anchor that the ear will later recognize when a vendor reads. Actors are precarious in life, as they are grand on stage. Their wages are small, their lodgings transient, and their reputations both livelihood and burden. The public sometimes confuses the performer with the role. An actor known for playing a monstrous role can be accosted in the street by someone who hates the fiction he performed. The social cost for performers is constant. They are public property in a particular way. Their faces contracted into templates that the crowd can claim and then punish. Technicians of illusion refine sensory expectation. A dimming of the footlights can be a stage instruction or a social cue. The precise timing of a blackout, a dropped curtain, the click of a pulley all produce a trained reaction. That habit of expectant surprise migrates into street life. A lamplighter who fails his post produces the same felt absence that a stage blackout produces on an audience. Vendors learn this. Editors pattern page breaks after curtain beats. The same timing that elicits a gasp in the theater will create a pause, at a stall under the lamp. Riots and scandal magnify cultural reverberation. A provocative poster or a managerial dispute can lead to a night of shouting. Printed accounts of a disturbance feed a wider moral panic. The sheet that carries an exaggerated account finds an audience eager for confirmation. Theater controversies therefore act as accelerants for rumor markets. The scandal that begins as a localized noise may become a metropolitan story amplified by woodcut and repetition. The afterlife of performance matters. As crowds spill into the damp air, voices carry the last scene into the square. Pages are folded and pockets adjusted. A torn program flutters in a gutter. The play's imagery nests in conversation as if it were eyewitness testimony. A lamplight that revealed a dramatic gesture will have provided the precise optics a vendor needs the next day. The stage supplies vocabulary, and the street supplies witnesses. Small material traces carry the memory forward. A program with a corner torn and reattached, a scrap of painted backdrop used as a handbill, a boot print left near a riverside stair. These objects anchor narrative in touch. A vendor finds such a scrap and shapes a paragraph around it. The image printed under lamplight travels on bodies and across thresholds. By morning, a scene that began as stagecraft will appear in cheap copy, respaced and revoiced for a neighborhood. The theater is thus an engine for the Gothic imagination. It manufactures a parade of validated sensations, and those sensations return to the street as objects fit for rumor. The lights, the traps, the glass, the ropes, the painted vistas, the smell of sawdust all work together to teach a city how to make theatrical terror seem concrete. The crowd learns where to look and how to fear. The play ends, the footlights dim, the sawdust is swept, and a torn scrap of paper catches lamplight on a sill. That scrap will be read under a lamp and folded into a pocket, and the night will carry it like a small, heavy secret. The river moves with a patience that outlasts panic, a tide that takes and returns with indifferent rhythm. It is a machine of motion and material, a slow engine that carries goods and bodies in the same current, that distributes detritus and sometimes returns a story wrapped in seaweed. The Thames is not a simple backdrop. It is a vector, a boundary, a conveyor, and a public stage. At low tide, the mud comes into view like a confessed ledger, tracks and prints and scraps of life pressed into the clay. At high tide, the city's edges dissolve, and the river becomes a dark throat that swallows objects and secrets, and then, in its own time, gives back fragments that force narratives into being. Tidal rhythm matters. The daily convulsion of rise and fall times the discovery of a body. Morning recoveries occur in a particular register, when light is thin and the quay is still damp with dew and coal smoke. Night finds and early dawn finds carry a different effect, an accusation of neglect or a hint of danger. Boatmen know which tides favor recovery, and they measure their days against the moon and the barometer and the schedules of barges. The rhythm makes rumor repeatable. When a body washes up where the ebb meets a particular stair, the place acquires a technical note. It becomes part of the river's ledger, an entry that will be compared with earlier entries. Patterns emerge, and patterns invite explanation. Boatmen are custodians of a particular knowledge. They work at the seam between land and water, and their lore is pragmatic, seasoned, and often fatalistic. They speak of the river in instrument terms, of eddies and backwash, of the way a body will tend to snag on a piling at certain tides. They speak also in nicknames, a shorthand of place and hazard. A river stair may be called by a single syllable that names a history of crossings and of recoveries. Boatmen pass information sideways in taverns, at wharves, along stairs, and those sideways transmissions are raw materials for later printed lines. When a boatman tells of a shoal of flotsam, listeners hear not only the fact, but the index of neglect that the river's cast-off implies. Material culture is crucial to identification and to story. Objects that cling to a recovered body become narrative anchors. A ring with an engraving, a watch stopped at a particular hour, a scrap of linen with a laundry mark, a button with a maker's stamp. Any of these become small proofs that a community can read. The inquest will ask about such things. A coroner's jury will note a make of button, a maker's name on a boot, a laundry token found in a pocket. These inventory items travel from mud to magistrate's note to printed paragraph, and at each stage their meaning expands. A ring that suggested a name in an inquest note becomes, in a vendor's voice, the sign of betrayal, or in a runner's gossip, the hint of a clandestine meeting. The object becomes a device for moral narrative. Recoveries follow ritual sequences. A body is found. Someone alerts a constable or a watchman. The coroner is summoned, and an inquest is scheduled. The inquest is public in form, a ritual that names the dead, locates the place and time, and lists witness testimony. In the inquest room, the private becomes public by procedural means. A clerk reads a petition, a witness swears an oath, and details are entered into a ledger that looks every bit like an archival instrument. The inquest is designed to establish cause of death, yet it also functions as a social process that binds meaning to material evidence. Coroner's notes, sometimes terse, sometimes florid, are the raw textual stock that cheap printers will later shape into paragraphs that sell. From the inquest to the broadsheet, the transformation is both a matter of selection and of amplification. A compositor selects lines that will hook. An editor chooses a verb that sharpens the headline. And an engraver imagines an image that will arrest the eye under lamplight. The textual movement often shortens nuance into a clear axis of motive and consequence. A cautious magistrate's finding that suggests misadventure becomes, in a woodcut and a screaming headline, a tale of foul play. That translation is commercially rational. The public responds to drama and to moral clarity, and what the cheap sheet sells is closure of a kind, even if the closure is provisional and instrumental. A printed paragraph does not simply report, it prescribes how to read the scene. Sung versions of recoveries also matter. Ballads and street songs convert narrative into memory that is easier to carry. A chorus repeated in a tavern or hawked at a stair drags the same detail across audiences and through time. Songs compress an event into a few repeated lines and a memorable cadence, and the cadence fixes image. A chorus that names a lane or cites a watchword will keep the story alive in ways that a printed paragraph sometimes cannot. The oral economy and the pressed economy thus cooperate. One hands the other a hook. The other sings it back with a tune that lodges in the teeth. Human vignettes reveal the route a story takes. A child finds a glove on a riverside stair and takes it to a mother. The mother mentions it in the wash house. A neighbor adds that a man was missing since the previous night. A boatman remembers a rumor of a scuffle on a quay. a constable notes the loose story in a small memorandum. The coroner's office files a request for an inquiry, and the inquest yields an official line about death by misadventure. An editor sees the coroner's minute and frames it with a woodcut. The vendor reads it aloud under a lamp, and a songster in the alley repeats the chorus in a tavern. By morning, the lane gets a new adjective, a word that promises peril to anyone who crosses it at dusk. Boatmen lore and smuggling stories overlay the recovery narratives. The river has always been a channel for illicit traffic and for ambiguous commerce. And when a body appears near a foreign crate or near a particular flagged vessel, the mind fills in motive with smuggling, with a fight over contraband, with foreign hands at work. Rumor loves the foreign as it loves the unknown. A brand on a bale, a half-visible shipping mark, a scrap of language heard in a sailor's mutter. Each of these can be used to produce a simple narrative that explains a body in terms that are culturally resonant. Traders and customs men sometimes object, but a cheap paragraph prefers a xenophobic or sensational explanation because it sells. Maps matter because they can fix reputations. When a recovery is repeated along a particular stretch of river, a map maker or a guide writer may mark the place with a note, a name, a warning. The repetition turns a tentative observation into a labeled territory. Places thus become haunted in a practical cartographic sense. A map that shows a cluster of recoveries ties together otherwise separate incidents and provides a visual argument. A street that appears near marked stairs will be avoided, and avoidance becomes practice. The map hardens reputation into a spatial decision. Material remains of the river often carry small inscriptions that function as keys. A laundry token pinched into a waistcoat will lead a searcher to a lodging house. A scrap of tailor's label will suggest a maker and a probable class. The work of matching is often inattentive and often mistaken, yet the effort itself creates closure. A watch with a stopped hand read at a certain hour becomes symbolic as well as instrumental. The stopped hour invites conjecture, and conjecture gives the press a verb that will pull readers. Even mistaken identifications can have effects. A misread initial in a ring can create a false accusation that gathers force as it is repeated. Inquest ritual is performative and procedural, and the performance matters. Witnesses speak under oath, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes with force, and the formats of testimony lend authority to what might otherwise be gossip. Coroners are legal technicians. Their notes provide a veneer of officialness, and magistrates' minutes can be quoted to lend a paragraph an air of objectivity. The press knows this, and editors often deploy coroners' language selectively to suggest a definitive conclusion when the finding is tentative. The result is a blurred threshold between legal text and sensational copy, a porous membrane that rumor crosses with ease. The social consequences of a labeled stretch of river can be immediate and lasting. A lane that acquires a reputation for casualties loses trade. Lodgings decline in value. Families may move away. Employers may avoid hiring from particular neighborhoods. Reputation translates into economic motion. The river therefore shapes not only stories, but livelihoods. The cost of a rumor is often material, and the material cost falls on those who live near marked stairs or docks. Seasonality and weather shape the rivers. Storytelling, winter frosts that tighten flow, autumn storms that throw flotsam on new banks, spring floods that reveal forgotten objects. Each seasonal pattern changes what the river returns. A wet autumn that yields many wash-up items intensifies rumor markets because more evidence appears, and sellers can pair objects with narrative. Conversely, a dry summer with fewer recoveries reduces the raw material for rumor and may focus attention on other forms of spectacle. Institutional practice intersects with the river in complicated ways. Magistrates, coroners, officers, harbor masters, customs officers, and municipal scavengers all take part in the administrative choreography that follows a recovery. Each office leaves notes. Each note can be read as a lead, and the collision of bureaucratic practices produces both formal records and stray scraps that vendors and songsters will turn into copy. The multiplicity of institutions increases the number of textual traces available to rumor markets. A rejected coroner's file may reappear in an archivist's pile, and an entry that seemed minor becomes fodder decades later for a guidebook or a printed moral tale. Bodies in the river are not merely biological facts. They are public texts that communities read and then annotate. That reading is never neutral. It is shaped by social prejudices, by class anxieties, by xenophobia, and by the market for sensation. The story that attaches to a recovered body often tells as much about the readers as about the dead. The corpse becomes a kind of mirror that refracts the community's fear and desire into a narrative of meaning. Vignettes show how small objects become anchors. A scrap of music sheet clutched in a recovered hand led a magistrate to a music hall. The proprietor recognized the notation, a performer identified the tune, and the inquest transformed a nameless body into a narrative about a late show and a lost place. A torn stocking with a maker's mark led to the discovery of a lodger with a missing shoe. A note washed into a pocket suggested a meeting at a riverside tavern. These small, linked observations provide the spine of a paragraph that will later be sold under lamplight. The river also hosts its own myths, a stock of images and stories that recur. Tales of ghostly boats that appear in fog, of women washing at dawn and finding bones, of a phantom figure on the tide that pulls at ropes. These narratives fill the cultural gap and act as templates for new events. When a new discovery resembles an older tale, the match is eager, and the public folds the new detail into familiar form. Familiar form makes a story easier to believe and easier to sell. Maps and broadsheets sometimes cooperate to fix a reputation. An illustrated supplement that pairs a coarse map with a dramatic woodcut moves the story from speech to image and then to spatial diagram. Where a map shows a cluster of recoveries and a broadsheet supplies a screaming headline, the pair has power. Visual association reinforces text, and the public sees in the graphic nexus a plausible pattern. The river shapes language itself. Phrases that refer to being taken by the tide, to being carried off by the current, to being found on the mud, become metaphors that travel back into daily speech. The metaphors normalize the event categories, and that normalization makes future rumors easier to create because the vocabulary exists and circulates. A language ready to name a return eases the work of narrative construction. Finally, the river teaches a lesson about naming. When place is named as dangerous, it changes the way people operate in space. A labeled stair, a marked quay, a haunted bend, these names reconfigure practice. A lane that receives a label of peril will be avoided, and that avoidance will produce less oversight, which in turn may increase the likelihood of further incidents. The naming of danger can set in motion a self-fulfilling pattern. Maps and paragraphs, in their small way, can alter the material conditions they describe. A rope, knotted and frayed, a laundry token, a stopped watch, a ring missing its twin, a button with a maker's stamp. These are items that turn the river's indifference into a readable script. The river itself does not explain. It distributes objects. People explain. The explanations compile into ledgers, into broadsheets, into songs, into maps. The Thames supplies evidence, and the city supplies story, together producing a river that is not only a current, but also a machine for making meaning. A map with a new mark along the bank will be opened in the morning. Names will be spoken in low voices. A flagged stare will gather fewer feet. The river will continue to move. The object recovered at dawn will move through hands and pages and music. One stretch of river, once named by repeated finds and repeated lines, will gain a reputation that will sit on maps and on tongues. And that reputation will shape how people move beside the water for years to come. Asylums, workhouses, and hospitals stack at the edge of neighborhoods like institutional ribs, places designed to hold what the city does not want to see closely. Their architecture declares separation. High walls, narrow windows, heavy doors, and courtyards that face inward all signal containment. Corridors run long and straight to allow supervised sightlines. Wards are arranged by sex, by condition, by capacity, in blocks that read like diagrams of social priority. In many places, an institutional compound sits where land was cheaper or where a parish boundary offered a convenient blank. The buildings are civic statements and practical devices built to move people through categories as efficiently as the city can manage them. The exterior is only a first message. Inside, rooms were laid out for throughput. Broad corridors led to common halls and to cell-like sleeping rooms. Kitchens were large and industrial. Laundry yards were open and sunken. Infirmaries sported wards with rows of beds placed like lines in a ledger. Asylum architecture experimented with domestic facades that attempted to soften containment. Verandas and small gardens that promised therapy through air and order. Workhouse plans emphasized labor and discipline, wings arranged to segregate men from women, the young from the old, the able-bodied from the infirm. Each plan implied judgment. An everyday visitor reading the layout could see classification as an element of design. Light in these institutions is not the soft lamplight of a parlor. It is institutional light, a calculated, often harsh glare, where tasks are finished and time is measured. At night, the soundscape is distinct. The slow creak of bed slats, the distant rhythm of nurses pacing, the clank of metal on metal where kitchen utensils are stacked, the hollow tap of carts on stone yards, low voices that sound like darning needles stitching explanation through darkness. Doors close with a practiced sliding thud. A ward lamp glows behind frosted glass until the next regulated hour. The interior acoustics return the smallest sound into a register of unease, a cough that travels, a boot that echoes, a whispered name that gathers listeners. The institutional night is full of procedural noise. Workhouses insist on order as a remedy to want. Men are given coursework, women are set to domestic tasks, children are taught rudimentary tasks that might serve industry. The promise is simple, the rhetoric brutal, and the lived reality often harsher. Rations are governed by detailed tables, beds by allocation lists, and conduct by rules that require constant recording. That recording produces paper trails, ledgers full of entries that catalog misdemeanors and absences and the occasional commendation. The ledger is both a tool of discipline and a source for rumor. An annotated line about a payment withheld, a note that a mattress was damp 2 nights running, a record that a particular inmate refused a task. These scraps circulate in human speech and find later lives in gossip. Asylums offer a different vocabulary. Where workhouses name deficit, asylums name altered mind. The early 19th century institutions mix therapeutic ambition with custodial routine. Patients are cataloged with a shorthand of symptoms and behaviors. Rooms are arranged to allow observation. Some architects and reformers advocated sunlit wards, treated promenades, and exercise yards. Others favored stricter seclusion. The result is a mixed architecture where therapy and custody coexist uneasily. The asylum became, in many places, both a repository for sorrow and an object lesson in modern classification, a place where difference was converted into a diagnosis. Hospitals sit between charity and procedure. They are working sites for tending bodies, for surgical practice, for the mechanics of care. The smell of an institutional hospital at night is sharp and metallic, tinctured by antiseptic rudiments and by the smell of oil lamps and stale linen. The ward routine runs on shift. Night nurses check dressings, tend to fevers, move trays, and administer broths. In corroded corners and under stairs, there are always tasks that the record will never fully capture. The institutional night is therefore partial knowledge, a place where what is noticed is what the rotation wants to notice, and what is not noticed slips into gaps. Human vignettes do the work of translation. A night nurse walking from ward to ward carries a lamp held low so as not to blind, but bright enough to show swelling and pallor. The lamp reveals a stitch of bandage, a damp hairline, a bruise half concealed by a blanket. The nurse notes names in shorthand, taps a ledger, and moves on. That movement is ritualized. Each step marks a routine of care and of counting. A patient wakes and asks a name aloud, unable to remember. Another patient in a side ward speaks of a missing friend who never returned, a rumor that gathers like lint in corners. The nurse becomes both observer and unseen witness, catching fragments and translating them into entries that will be kept and then consulted. The desk in the morning holds the accretion of the night. An inmate memory testifies differently. The cell door has a sound that converts hope into calculation. A resident who has spent seasons in institutional rotation learns to register time by footsteps rather than by clock. The resident notes the lamplighter who is slow on Thursdays, the ward that receives fewer blankets in spring, the porter who whistles a particular fragment of tune before the laundry round. Those small practices are the grammar of survival. When a door is left slightly ajar, a rumor begins. When a blanket goes missing, an accusation forms. The lived interiority of institutional nights produces a vernacular that later leaks into street rumor. Deaths in institutions generate particular anxieties. A body removed at dawn from a workhouse ward will be handled by scrupulous clerks, and yet will also be a thing of rumor by noon. Families question cause and timing. Where burials are mass or pauper, the lack of named grave can transform grief into speculation. Exhumation panic, a phrase repeated in certain pamphlets, appears whenever mismanagement is suspected or when a ledger entry looks incomplete. The institutional dead are often unnamed in public memory, and that anonymity makes them fertile material for speculation. A broken entry in a register, a late burial, an unclear notation in a coroner's file all function as textual gaps that the public rushes to fill. Reform movements respond to such anxieties with a language of remedy and a politics of classification. Commissioners publish reports, committees recommend plans, and philanthropists fund new buildings. Those reforms recast horror as pathology to be studied and cured. Where once a wailing at an unlit gate might have inspired superstition, now an inspector's minute might offer an explanation couched in terms of sanitation, overcrowding, or the need for professional nurses. Public inquiry makes the private spectacle legible as administrative failure, and administrative language attempts to convert emotive panic into a problem of governance. Yet the reform discourse can also widen the field for rumor by creating more texts to be read in other ways. A report that lists overcrowding in a ward will be turned by a vendor into an allegation of neglect, a heading that sells. Institutional records provide both remedy and narrative. Vestry minutes, hospital ledgers, asylum casebooks, and workhouse order books all produce entries that can be read for scandal. An instruction that a particular ward be closed for fumigation becomes a fragment that can be reinterpreted as a secrecy about contagion. A note that a patient was transferred for observation is thin copy for a sensational paragraph that hints at violence. The practical texts that aim to manage problems are easily retooled into material that confirms fear. The record that intends to regulate life within a wall becomes raw material for the city's outside conversation. Sound and architecture combine to produce hauntings of credibility. Night noises that are ordinary in institutions become signals elsewhere. The trolley wheel that squeaks on hospital stone will be imagined as a cart that carries bodies to a hidden pit. The plaintive calls of a woman at a window for a lost child will be retold as evidence of brutality. Sound multiplies into tale. Buildings that are meant to be rational instruments of care therefore become engines of myth because the noises and textures they produce are legible in multiple registries. Human stories that escape institutional walls tend to follow a pattern of personalization and simplification, where an administrative report will list a sequence of events in neutral terms. A whispered account converts the sequence into a story with a clear human face and a moral center. A patient becomes a figure, a nurse becomes a villain, a porter becomes an eyewitness, the ledger becomes proof. The temptation to narrativize is strong because stories are actionable in a way indexes are not. A neighbor who hears that a ward was locked for a night will assume worst. The conversion from index to tale is fast and often irreversible. Material traces from institutions travel in the same networks as other objects. A discarded hospital sheet with a bloodstain, a torn workhouse ticket, a faded inmate's cap, a physician's visiting card found under a stair. These objects carry authority. The vendor who buys a sheet with a scrap of hospital paper will construct a paragraph that ties the object to a recent rumor and then sells that composite under lamplight. Tactile proof converts into narrative leverage. Reform rhetoric attempted to make horror legible and to impose remedies. Reports on ventilation, drainage, staffing, and diet all made claims about progress. New hospitals were built with wards that emphasized air and light. asylum plans incorporated promenades and gardens, and workhouses adjusted regulations in response to scandal. The language of improvement inserted new vocabulary into public conversation, words that vendors and pamphleteers could pick up and repurpose. Sanitation became both a technical term and a moral axis. The very vocabulary of reform therefore supplied vendors with hooks. Yet, institutional change also created new kinds of secrecy. Institutions that became more professional also accumulated procedures that were less legible to neighbors. Medical rationales, case notes, internal assessments, exported patients. These practices produced layers of documentation that would not be easily read by a lay public. The opacity of professional language could be read as concealment, and that perceived concealment became its own engine for rumor. A refusal to comment from an institution could be reinterpreted as an admission of guilt. The social cost of rumor is tangible. Families whose names are associated with an institutional scandal suffer diminished standing. Workers avoid hiring from certain streets. Property values adjust. Even the presence of an institution can shape neighborhood identity over decades. A district known for providing care becomes also a district known for needing care, and that duality affects how people move, where they live, and how they speak of place. An archival note demonstrates how small official texts can have outsized lives. A magistrate's minute records that a particular ward required 24-hour observation after a fever outbreak. The minute is terse and administrative. Read in different hands, it becomes evidence of epidemic mismanagement, proof of neglect, and a rationale for pamphlet narratives. The same line circulates in report rooms, in parish gossip, and finally in the cheap sheet that names a street as unhealthy. The chain of textual mediation shows how institutional documentation can be translated into reputation. Institutions, therefore, function as both sources of care and sources of narrative material. The night inside is ordered, noisy, and procedural. The night outside listens and translates. In that translation, institutions are often misread as monstrous or as sites of scandal, sometimes rightly so, often exaggerated. The human cost of both neglect and rumor is real. The institutional night does what its architecture intends, and more. It holds bodies, it produces records, and it furnishes the city with the materials by which the street explains itself. The sounds of a ward at midnight, the careful notation in a ledger, the image of a patient being carried on a stretcher. These are the components that pass through human mouths and printed under lamplight will shape how neighborhoods remember and how the city maps its own borders between care and neglect. Public ritual and legal procedure shaped how violence became intelligible in the modern city. Where earlier centuries staged punishment as a visible pedagogy, 19th century institutions concentrated attention in quieter forms that nevertheless gathered crowds and produced durable reputations. The inquest emerged as a principal instrument for converting a discovery into a name, a cause, and a ledger entry. A body found in a lane or on a riverbank followed a determined sequence of administrative moves. A report reached a constable or a station clerk who entered an initial note. The coroner accepted the case, summoned witnesses, and assembled a jury of lay citizens to hear testimony. Answers were taken under oath and transcribed. the coroner's minute recorded objects, times, and observed marks in terse language. That ledger-like record offered the raw textual stock that printers and vendors would later shape into public narrative. The inquest is choreography as much as law. Witnesses mount the stand, and voices are modulated for clarity. A coroner asks pointed questions to elicit facts that fit legal categories. Jurors deliberate in a narrow vocabulary, and the formal phrasing of a finding moves quickly into common speech. Death by misadventure, death from natural causes, open verdict. These short phrases compress ambiguity into usable labels. Editors and vendors lift those phrases and place them as hooks in headlines a crowd can hold. The rhetorical weight of coroner's language matters because it bestows the appearance of authority. A cautious line in a coroner's minute can be cut into a declarative sentence in a cheap sheet, producing the sense of closure even when uncertainty remains. Objects form the bridge between scene and narrative. A shoe, a button, a piece of monogrammed linen, a stopped watch, a laundry token, any small item found with a scene carries indexical weight. The coroner's minute logs such items with inventory marks. A compositor reads the notation, a pressman imagines a headline, and an engraver designs a plate that will render the object legible under lamplight. Each transformation expands meaning. Where official notes may hedge, printed copy often asserts. The editorial economy privileges clarity and motive because those elements sell. The movement from inventory to image frequently converts tentative evidence into seeming proof. The broadsheet cycle depends on selection and velocity. A local register note or a station book entry circulates into a reporter's hands. An enterprising compositor or an editor crafts a hook, and a vendor positions the sheet where lamplight forms an audience. The vendor reads aloud, the crowd supplies extras and pauses, and oral elaboration sometimes returns to the press and is incorporated into the next issue. The loop of false certainty becomes self-reinforcing. The more a line is repeated, the more it accrues the weight of fact. The cheap sheet is a machine that turns partial sight into social orientation. The events of 1888 in Whitechapel provide a revealing test case. Between late August and November that year, a series of violent discoveries in the East End drew intense local and metropolitan attention. The cluster of locations, the proximity of scenes to public thresholds, and the social density of the neighborhoods produced a heightened sense of vulnerability. The label Jack the Ripper emerged in newspapers and in public correspondence, partly from letters sent to editors and police, and partly as a press shorthand that bound otherwise separate discoveries into a single cultural node. The name lodged in print and conversation, and under that name, anxieties about migration, poverty, policing, and gender condensed into a durable symbol. A clarification for those unfamiliar with the history. Jack the Ripper functions more as a cultural category than as a confirmed legal identity. Police records, witness statements, and coroner's findings leave many uncertainties. Letters claiming responsibility, anonymous tips, and contradictory sightings entered public circulation and were printed because they attracted attention. The result was an expansive market for explanation in which speculation often outran verification. The Ripper moment, therefore, reveals less about a single perpetrator than about how modern urban publics consume and produce meaning about violence. Policing practice shaped how scenes were handled and how information leaked into public view. The Metropolitan Police introduced standardized station books, patrol routines, and station diaries that altered how a scene was processed. Inspectors compiled witness lists and item inventories. Surgeons sometimes supplied early opinions, and sergeants annotated entries that later became sources for reporters. Yet the same records could be quoted selectively or leaked in ways that shaped narrative. The police emphasis on corroboration and method sometimes conflicted with a press eager for narrative and with a public hungry for answers. Amateur detectives and civic associations stepped into the gap with maps, suspect lists, and public theories that at times pressured police and at times distracted investigations with spurious leads. Cartography intensified pattern perception. A printed map that marked locations of discovery creates a visible argument at a glance. A cluster on paper looks like evidence. Mapmakers and pamphleteers assembled annotated sheets readers could digest quickly. A marked concentration invites municipal response and behavioral change. Merchants, residents, and officials reacted to such representations by shifting movement and reallocating resources. Cartography, therefore, converts rumor into spatial logic, and spatial logic, in turn, reshapes practice on the ground. Amateur expertise proliferated into clubs, civic societies, and private pamphlet campaigns. Some groups aimed to assist police, others sought moral reform, others offered suspect lists and theories for profit or notoriety. Pamphlets argued leads, published names, and proposed diagnoses. Civic intervention mattered because it drew pressure on authorities and generated more textual material for the press to amplify. The scene thus produced additional evidence and multiplied attention. Visual plates and woodcuts functioned as mnemonic devices. An engraving of a silhouetted figure, a marked stare, a sketch of a ragged coat, these elements act as anchors that travel across issues. The repetition of a plate yields cultural recognition. Readers, encountering the same image, attach it to variant paragraphs. Visual economy compresses suspicion into durable motifs that remain legible even when the archival detail decays. The market sometimes encouraged counterfeit artifacts. Anonymous letters claiming responsibility, hoaxed clues, and planted items circulated because they sold. Editors printed material they suspected might be false because the paragraph moved copies. The transactional reality altered the epistemic field for the public. Readers learned to be credulous and skeptical at once, yet commercial pressure often made skepticism expensive for a vendor whose livelihood relied on quick turnover. Forensic practice in the period was nascent and uneven. Early efforts at cataloging shoes, clothing, and other visible marks relied on descriptive lists in station books. Photography, when used, fixed visual states that were harder to reframe in print, yet photography and its standardization varied across divisions. Fingerprint classification was not yet routine in many departments during the initial Whitechapel inquiries, and chemical or microscopic methods were in formative stages. The professional record therefore carried authority and lacunae. Those lacunae were openings for the press to fill with narrative. Governance and administrative error also matter. The procedural chain that moves a scene into public life is longer than a single minute. After discovery, a constable's immediate report must be corroborated. Items logged in station books and custody decisions made. Sometimes an attending surgeon records an early opinion. A constable inventories items. An inspector issues an interim notice, and a telegram circulates. Each act is a node in an information network. Errors at any node, a misdated entry, a misread initial, an ill-phrased medical note, become opportunities for reinterpretation when they fall into the hands of a hungry press. Human vignettes make the mechanism legible. A constable encounters a witness who saw a man near a doorway. The constable enters a short note in a station book. An inspector drafts a report. A clerk copies a phrase that seems decisive. An editor seizes the phrase for a headline. A vendor reads it under lamplight. A neighbor recognizes the described coat and supplies a name. A third teller adds a detail. Within hours, a new sighting is reported to police, adding to the corpus. Each pass thickens. Certainty. A public's belief in a pattern increases the rate of reports, and so the cycle repeats. The gender dimension demands emphasis. Many discovered scenes occurred at public thresholds, used by women who worked in precarious trades after dark. Press cycles often moralized those lives, applying language that attached stigma to particular occupations and neighborhoods. Women who lived or worked in marked districts faced discrimination seeking lodgings or employment. The operation of inquiry and press coverage therefore produced distinctly gendered harms, shaping mobility and safety strategies for those most exposed to the night. Policy fallout was mixed and uneven. Intense public attention sometimes forced municipal change, patrol redeployment, and extensions of lighting. Debates about housing, sanitation, and public health gained renewed traction. In some cases, private funds or philanthropic schemes paid for extra lamps or for volunteer night patrols. Those grassroots measures provided practical relief while producing new narratives of vigilance that vendors could convert into copy. Reforms that required funding and long-term political will often stalled, leaving reputational damage intact even where policy gestures were made. Vigilante actions complicated the scene. Private groups that sought to identify alleged perpetrators sometimes misidentified suspects, and mob captures or rough justice could have legal and social ripple effects. A suspect roughed up by a crowd might be innocent, but press coverage often emphasized spectacle of capture rather than questions of proof. Such episodes hardened public conviction and made later exoneration difficult because public memory favored dramatic closure over procedural nuance. The emotional economy of the press cycle produced long-term effects for families and neighborhoods. Children from households associated with a marked lane carried stigma into employment prospects and social life. Landlords advertising a district as improved might still find the old paragraph insisted on at tavern counters. Reputation, therefore, produced intergenerational burdens because narrative durability often outlasted demographic turnover and infrastructural change. The production of counterfeit evidence and hoaxes further complicated truth-seeking. Forged letters, false tips, and deliberate misdirection appeared in the public domain because they sold, and because some actors sought notoriety. Editors printed letters that offered motive because readers demanded explanation. Those practices blurred the boundary between investigatory material and manufactured copy, and they increased the difficulty of separating verified fact from rumor. The archive amplifies certain narratives by selective survival. Broadsheets, inquest minutes, maps, and pamphlets that entered private collections or public archives survive and inform later retellings. Later readers often encounter edited narratives and emblematic images that tidy the messy flow of competing reports. A repeated plate from the period becomes a visual shorthand for an era. The survival of particular documents, rather than others, shapes popular memory as much as the events themselves did. Amateur detectives and civic associations mattered in political terms. Pamphleteers pressed municipal authorities for patrol changes and for institutional reform. Detective clubs published sketches and suspect lists. Pressure from publics that felt unsafe could force administrative responses, and officials who acted visibly could gain political credit. The political economy of fear therefore channeled resources and sometimes produced meaningful change. Yet the same attention could also entrench reputations without remedying structural vulnerability. Maps played rhetorical and material roles. A printed map that locates a string of discoveries supplies a visible argument about danger and containment. Municipal authorities, merchants, and residents respond to such visual arguments by altering pedestrian flow and resource deployment. Maps therefore perform as policy instruments as well as narrative ones. A cluster drawn on a sheet becomes a place to avoid, which in turn reduces oversight and can create conditions that reinforce the original problem. Forensic innovation gradually altered the investigative horizon, but adoption was uneven. Later in the century, photographic documentation and eventual fingerprint methods added technical capacities that improved evidence preservation and identification. Still, adoption required training, resources, and institutional will. Where technique improved, public doubt sometimes followed because the culture of immediate narrative expectation had already formed. New methods could reassure some publics, while others remained primed to prefer dramatic closure. Finally, the inquest itself holds centrality because it converts private emergency into public text. One line in a coroner's minute can be cut into a headline and sold under lamplight. One vendor's reading can travel across neighborhoods and become the shared account of many people. The public ritual of naming, therefore, has juridical and social force. The boundaries between official record and popular conviction blur when words of law are co-opted into an economy of sensation. The cycle has ambivalent consequences. Public scrutiny can expose institutional failure and press for reform. At the same time, the publicity machine can magnify rumor and produce social harm. A redistribution of patrols may follow moral panic, producing immediate security benefits for some. At the same time, reputational damage endures for neighborhoods and for vulnerable people who lack the means to contest a circulating account. The inquest and the press together thus produce correction and collateral damage, a dialectic that remakes urban life as much as it records it. One coroner's minute turned into a printed paragraph can alter how a street is walked for generations. The network of naming that links coroners' minutes, police records, maps, pamphlets, and cheap sheets constructs a civic topography of dread. That topography orders movement, economic practice, municipal priorities, and memory long after the immediate moment of discovery. Violence thus functions not only as event, but also as instrument, reorganizing the city through language, image, and routine practice. Doorways, thresholds, and small lights form the ordinary technologies by which a city holds itself together after dusk. These are not dramatic institutions, but habitual devices of care and warning. A lamplighter on his round, a laundress placing a candle at a back step, a neighbor who leaves a chair by the window each night. These are practices that make movement predictable and make places legible. The city learns to read these gestures as easily as it reads a map. Where the light is steady and the candles common, people move more freely. Where lamps fail, where doorsteps gather neglect, the city's grammar changes and caution becomes a practice posture. Lamplighters built patterns of competence into night. They kept routes and schedules, poles and hooks, a hand list noting which lamp needed mantles and which valve required attention. The lamplighter route read like a slow score, a series of timed actions that imposed rhythm on the dark. In many parishes, the lamplighter's route was legally defined, a duty recorded in a vestry minute or in a household ordinance. The presence of light therefore signaled something beyond visibility. A lit lamp announced that someone, somewhere, had kept time and duty. Conversely, an unlit lamp registered neglect. Neighbors noticed the lapse. The remark moved from window to stall and then into print. The lamp was both a physical tool and a social sign, an explicit claim about care. Watchfires and ward rounds were older techniques that adapted to modern rhythms. A watchfire might mean a small community fire tended on a quay or a yard to provide orientation in thick weather, an ember kept alive as a local signal. Wardens and watchmen patrolled along fixed beats, calling hours aloud, announcing conditions and passing small practical information. Their rounds were embodied forms of record-keeping. A watchman's ledger might note a gate left ajar, a gutter blocked, a lamp that sputtered. These entries did not vanish into bureaucracy. They circulated orally and sometimes in printed minutes. A minor breach noted as an attendance failure could be the first line of a rumor when repeated across kitchen tables and vendor stalls. Domestic protections operate on the same logic of visible duty. Candles placed in upper windows mark presence and intention. A lit candle in a doorway can mean a household is watching, that a lodger should return safely, or that the house offers temporary shelter to a stranger who arrives at night. Marks on lintels, the carved scratch known in earlier folk practice as a protection mark, the placement of certain herbs by thresholds. These are gestures that translate private precaution into public sign. They are not merely superstitious relics. They are practical communicative acts in dense urban fabrics, where formal policing may be distant and where social knowledge matters directly to survival. Parish rituals overlay these domestic acts with institutional language. Vestry orders set lamp duties and laid fines for neglect. A household required by ordinance to keep a lamp at a given corner became a node in the network of care. When the household's lamp burned, it meant a public commitment fulfilled. When it failed, an omission became a conversational fact. That small administrative note therefore functions as both law and signal. It intersects with everyday practice because people learn to trust the presence of a light as an assurance they could count on. Neighborhood codes emerged informally as well. Laundresses on routes developed tacit tallies of lamp counts. Shopkeepers left a stool by a shutter to show watch, and older residents taught younger ones to count certain lanterns as a way to find way home. These practices were low cost and high signal. They were easily observed and could be repeated. The cost of visible protection was small, but The social value was large. Where such rituals persisted, places developed reputations for care that were as convincing as any ordinance. The ritual of reading aloud under a lamp intersects with domestic protection in iterative ways. A vendor under lamplight reads a paragraph that names a street and hints at danger. A woman hears the line from her upper window and positions a candle in the doorway precisely because the line suggested risk. The candle is not only a superstition, it is a pragmatic response to a perceived hazard, and it becomes part of the visible ecology of that night. The vendor's paragraph and the candle on the step, therefore, form a feedback loop where text produces gesture and gesture validates the text. Small objects perform protective work. A nailed horseshoe, a chalked mark, a sprig of rosemary tied to a latch. These are tactile signals others can read quickly. In crowded tenements, such marks work as shorthand. They do not require literacy. They require attention. The act of placing a mark is an act of registration, a claim that this space is tended. Where such marks disappear or where marks conflict, they produce questions that neighbors answer with talk. The talk becomes rumor when it leaves the immediate street. Watchfires carry communal memory as well as heat. A community that keeps a watchfire on particular nights repeats a civic memory of past crises. Those fires are small rituals of readiness. They are places where neighbors exchange news and where a signal will call further tending. The ember itself is a shared object, and the act of maintaining it is a communal public relation that lets strangers know that someone cares enough to keep the light lit. Watchfires are also practical. In thick fog, they provide orientation in ways that a lamplight may not. The maintenance of one small fire can prevent a dozen minor accidents and can reduce the space for rumor to grow by making movement legible. Domestic marking interacts with legal and customary economies. A mark on a door can identify a household as part of a guild or as a supplier to a particular trade, or as a household that maintains certain obligations. Marks can be a form of shorthand debit, signals about reputation as much as about ritual. The absence of certain marks becomes informative in turn. When a known sign does not appear, a neighbor asks why, and the question becomes talk. Gossip circulates, and the vendor will pick it up as a potential paragraph. The public market for information therefore converts the grammar of domestic protection into commerce. Practical devices of protection also include physical arrangements of property. A sturdy shutter shows care. A well-drained step keeps mud from pooling and prevents the staining that signals neglect. A clean threshold suggests occupancy. Such mundane details function as indices because people see and interpret them quickly. A stewarded street with careful steps and lit thresholds signals a community's capacity for collective attention. A neglected street signals the opposite. The social reading of those signals is rapid and decisive. Faith and charm persist within the urban logic without needing to be divorced from practical measures. Charms carried in pockets, a coin placed into a chimney, an oil lamp sprinkled with an herb. These acts combine an emotional protection with a visible action. They are pragmatic because they change behavior. A person who wears a charm may also move differently, avoid certain thresholds, or take a companion. The charm, therefore, performs more than its symbolic function. It alters practice, and so it alters risk calculations. The lamplighter's delay illustrates how fragile the system can be. A single late round opens a temporal gap that neighbors notice. That gap becomes a conversational opening. One person tells the story of the late light. Another mentions the unsteady valve. By the next night, the tale may have become a paragraph. The fragile choreography of care shows how small administrative or mechanical failures cascade into social uncertainty. That sensitivity explains why parish minutes about lamp duty carry outsized weight when vendors and neighbors talk. An administrative detail thus becomes a dramaturgical device for rumor. Mutual aid networks formalize these rituals in certain corners. Neighborhood funds collect small amounts to pay for extra fuel or for a volunteer to mind a watch. In tenement blocks, a roster organizes who will sit up on nights when a family is ill. Such rosters are practical and formal in their own way. They generate records and obligations, and they produce social capital. The visibility of these acts renders a place more resilient. That resilience is legible to others, and therefore reduces the attractiveness of rumor as a compensatory narrative. Markets of trust form where ritual is regular. A market vendor who knows the lamplighter's schedule can time his reading to coincide with a reliable audience. A laundress who knows which lamplights will be burning can choose a route that avoids risk for children. Those microeconomic decisions scale across neighborhoods to shape flows of people and goods. The routines of care therefore become informal infrastructure, the kind of low-level organization that planners rarely price but that communities depend upon. Regulation interacts with ritual. Vestry orders that place duties on households or that allocate lamp costs institutionalize a practice and allow legal redress. A fine for failing to burn a lamp is an explicit mechanism for enforcing communal norms. The existence of enforcement changes incentives. Households more likely to comply produce visible outcomes. The law, therefore, amplifies the ritual by converting it into a monitored and sanctionable duty. Yet law itself can be uneven. Enforcement depends on resources and on local politics. A failed enforcement regime can produce the same reputational effects as a non-lit lamp, because the lack of follow-through signals the inability of an institution to govern the details that matter to daily life. Ceremony matters in small ways. A parish bell rung at certain nights, a formal reading of a list at a meeting, the public notation of debts and repairs. These acts ritualize care. They create moments when a community rehearses trust publicly. The repetition of those ceremonies binds people into habits and into expectations. Where ceremony breaks down, people notice. The failure becomes another tale. The ritual, therefore, functions both as practice and as public text. Practical protection has limits and blind spots. Narrow alleys, cellar doors, and unlit courtyards remain hard to patrol. Institutional attention favors visible fronts and main streets, leaving interior domains to the care of households and neighbors. The uneven distribution of protection produces spaces of concentrated vulnerability. Those spaces attract narrative attention because they offer legible contrast to maintained places. A single well-kept row facing a neglected yard creates a story in which neglect appears morally charged. Domestic protections shape how a city delegates trust. In dense neighborhoods, the expectation that a neighbor will notice and act replaces more formal institutions in many cases. That delegation of trust is efficient, and yet it can be fragile. It depends on the density of social ties and on the continuity of practice. Where turnover is high, where migration is rapid, these networks weaken and the rituals of protection lose force. The weakening in turn becomes fodder for print markets that seek to explain the new instability by naming villains or institutions to blame. Small practices of protection therefore accumulate into territorial reputations. A street where candles burn, where shutters are mended, where lamplighters are punctual will be read as safe. A street where thresholds collect wet and where lamps sputter will be read as suspect. Reputation changes bodies' movement. It shapes commerce, and it alters municipal attention. The rituals are small and practical, but their consequences are large. A laundress who places a candle at a back step, a lamplighter who keeps time, a neighbor who scratches a small mark into a lintel. These ordinary acts combine to make the city navigable at night. They are technologies of care disguised as habit. They are visible proofs that someone watches and tends. The rituals of domestic protection therefore operate as the low-pressure valves of urban life, the quiet mechanisms that keep rumor from filling every gap, and the small public works that allow strangers to pass one another without constant fear. Maps and guides do more than point a stranger to an address. They assign meaning to streets and fix reputations that oral rumor might otherwise let drift. A printed annotation gathers repeated mentions, a cluster of recoveries, a vendor's paragraph, and a parish minute, and renders them as a legible claim about place. Where a spoken warning can fade, a marked page makes judgment durable. A boxed lane becomes a named risk, and that name changes how people behave, where landlords invest, and how municipal attention is allotted. Cartographers and guide writers perform selection. Decisions about what to include or omit turn a map into an argument. An annotator who places a caution next to a key signals that the point has significance beyond coordinates. Editors consult officials, republish local anecdotes, and sometimes reuse copy from broadsheets. The condensation process privileges repetition and shock. Repetition plus visual placement equals perceived weight. A shaded block or a hatched line communicates danger faster than a paragraph can be read, and for a population moving at night, that economy of glance matters. Visual grammar does heavy work. A cross, a shaded strip, a bold type, a circled stare, these graphic devices supply rapid orientation. A reader scanning a map locates clusters at a glance. A shaded quarter labeled unsavory or dangerous requires no argument. The visual reduction of cognitive effort produces uptake and thus behavior change. A coachman choosing a route, a lodger refusing a room, a merchant delaying a tenancy. These micro decisions scale to reshape pedestrian flows and commerce. Guidebooks inhabit the same economy as penny sheets and theater plates. They borrow motifs and reuse stock images. A woodcut that's circulated in cheap print becomes a plate in a pocket guide, and a short local phrase in a pamphlet is reproduced as practical counsel. Guide authors are not neutral compilers. Their choices reflect authority, commercial calculation, and cultural prejudice. Publishing a warning often creates demand. Readers prize practical advice bundled with sensation, and publishers respond by increasing reputational content. Maps and municipal policy interact in feedback loops. Where authorities invest in lighting, sanitation, or patrols annotations change over time. Conversely, a map that marks a location as dangerous can prompt a council to reallocate funds. Representation can be cause, as well as record. A boxed lane on a popular guide may be the justification cited in a council minute when officials reassign patrols, or extend streetlight lines. The map thus functions as both evidence and instrument. The moral economy of mapping matters. Who is named and who is omitted is not neutral. Marginalized quarters, dockside alleys, and immigrant enclaves bear the brunt of reputational marking. A repeated linkage between a street and crime or vice becomes shorthand for other perceived deficits. Those judgments harden into social and economic penalties. Landlords prefer safer blocks. Employers favor unmarked districts. Public services route around stigmatized lanes. Mapping, therefore, participates in structural inequality. Maps can also commodify risk. Some guides turn danger into a spectacle. Haunted walks and sensational routes sell to curious readers and to visitors. A guide that advertises a thrilling stair or a notorious alley transforms local misfortune into a consumed product. That commodification can bring investment of a certain kind, often exploitative, and can also deepen the extraction of a neighborhood's notoriety into long-term branding. Provenance gives maps authority. A guide that cites municipal reports, coroner's returns, or police statistics appears credible. Official citation amplifies persuasive force. Yet the presence of official language does not guarantee neutrality. Editors select which official lines to quote and which to omit. An ambiguous open verdict in a coroner's minute can be reframed as pattern when quoted selectively. The map's authority, therefore, derives from both citation and editorial shaping. Technologies of reproduction accelerate reputational crystallization. Copper plate engraving, lithography, and steam presses increase the speed at which annotated pages circulated. Faster reproduction meant reputational marks could reach more hands sooner. A local scandal referenced in a broadsheet could be mapped in a guide's next edition. Reproduction speeds, therefore, shorten the lag between rumor and durable annotation. Maps create consultative rituals. Before a move, before a hiring decision, before a coach hire, guides are checked. The act of consultation reifies the claim. Repeated checking normalizes the map's judgment and embeds reputational marks into social practice. That ritual of consultation helps convert ephemeral paragraph into institutional practice. Resistance appears in countermapping and remediation. Local committees and philanthropic associations sometimes publish alternative guides that highlight improvements and challenge stigma. Pocket pamphlets that explain municipal reforms aim to update the record. Success depends on resources and wider public's willingness to accept revision. When remediation fails, reputational inertia persists because the older, sensational narrative retains circulation in taverns, in vendor stalls, and in secondhand guides. Small consequences compound. A single circled stair can reduce lodging inquiries in its vicinity. A merchant who scans an addition may delay a lease. A policeman consulting a pressed map may alter a beat. These acts convert a printed mark into lived reality. The map does not merely describe, it prescribes movement and attention. Maps therefore function as a technology of naming and as an actor in urban life. They take fragments from rumor ecology and translate them into directives that alter everyday behavior. A marginal note can become a curb on commerce, a reason to avoid a route, or a justification for municipal lighting. The city learns to read itself by paper as much as by sight, and the printed page plays a powerful role in branding fear. Rain thins to a soft smear the glass a faint veil of breath and thread. A fingertip draws a careful circle through the moisture, the motion patient, the small clearing deliberate. Where the skin meets the pane, a thin window opens onto a patch of lamplight and wet stone. The rest of the street folded back into half-formed shadow. The act is domestic, almost ceremonial, an attention paid in private that reconfigures how the world beyond the room reads at once. On the sill, a small scrap of paper clings with a damp halo. The type is cheap, the edge torn ragged, the ink run where rain has kissed the page. Yet a single sentence remains clean in that tiny focus of light. The line names a place and an action, and in naming them, it converts distance into a relation. It turns an aggregate of anonymous motions into a particular geography of concern. Paper nailed to glass functions as a private declaration that will become public currency the moment the line is repeated aloud. The city learns from such gestures. A lamp left burning becomes a promise. A counted lamp, a ledger of care. A marked lintel, a nailed horseshoe, a coin in a chimney carry messages thinner than law and thicker than rumor. Objects translate observation into trust. The inquest binds material into a record. The press repeats it with a cadence tuned to circulation. Theaters teach the crowd the rhythm of shock and release. Maps freeze. Repeated mentions into a lasting claim. Each device is different in scale. Each practice has its own logic. Yet they all perform the same work. They render uncertainty into a field that human minds can map and inhabit. When a line travels from window to lamplight, it changes form. A neat phrase becomes a paragraph at a vendor's stall. The paragraph becomes a chorus in a tavern. The chorus becomes the spoken geography that shapes how people move after dusk. Repetition is not mere multiplication. It is a material process that tampers meaning into place. The more the line is spoken, the more the street aligns with it. Patterns of avoidance and circulation harden. Commerce rearranges. Households adopt new precautions. The city's cartography is as much oral as it is inked. There's a politics in small signals. Naming is a claim about care and about danger, and the act of naming orders resources, sympathy, blame, and attention. A lamp that burns in one quarter, a charity that repairs a stair, a map that boxes a block all redistribute the burdens of trust and the privileges of safety. Those distributions are rarely neutral. They reflect networks of power, economies of attention, and histories of neglect. The same gesture that protects a neighbor can stigmatize a street. The same paragraph that sells copies can deprive families of livelihood. The fingertip lifts, and the circle fogs again. The page clings. The lamplight quivers. The street resumes its slow grammar of slips and returns. Inside the room, the kettle clicks. A floorboard breathes. A curtain settles. Outside, the vendor folds damp sheets. The lamplighter checks a mantle. A child counts the lamps on a route. Those small acts knit the night into a fabric that holds and fails, that reassures and alarms. The cleared ring on the glass is both a moment of attention and a unit of translation, a quiet tool for making the unknown legible. The scrap on the sill keeps its single sentence plain and sharp. It will travel from hand to mouth and back into print. It will gather objects and witness and ledger lines as it moves. It will not explain everything. It will not answer the deeper causes of poverty or neglect. Yet it will alter how people cross a threshold and how they sleep. And for that modest change, it is consequential. The city is composed of such modest changes, a multitude of private clearings that together create the map by which strangers and neighbors make their night survivable.